Welcome to another episode of the Liberator podcast. This is episode 68. We're coming to you early this week, not on Thursday. We'll have two episodes. Twice. We'll have two episodes this week. We're catching up for not being on Thanksgiving last week. So good break for us. We weren't able to come to you that week, and we were glad to not be able to because we were enjoying it at home. So, yeah.
And it's good that we get this out quick. It's good that we get to go to this week because something big, or in Russell's opinion, that doesn't matter at all, happened on Tuesday.
It's like I was like, do we really have to make an episode on what the Supreme Court says? Like, who freaking cares?
Yeah.
Like, I got to talk about it because it's relevant.
You don't just realize,
pretend
Russell,
like it's not.
What you're ignorant on this, and really, it's all about voting pro-life, getting pro-life presidents, getting Supreme Court justices, and you are so ignorant on this.
Dude, if we do that for 50 years, maybe only 68 million babies will die.
Yeah.
And then we can have a success.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, the Supreme Court met, and the Supreme Court met as they've met many, many times before.
Yep.
But
39.
Yes, there are
on abortion.
There are interesting things said during the arguments worth commenting on that tell us about the state of our culture. The reason James makes this joke that I don't care is because I don't care. But I do think that the Supreme Court reflects the state of the culture. So like the things that are being said at the Supreme Court to the Supreme Court kind of give us an indication of where we're at in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. The part that I don't care about is that I don't believe that what they decide in Dobbs v. Jackson should have any bearing on what we do day in and day out and what state magistrates do. So,
would it be accurate to say, I think both of you guys would agree with this, but we believe that they should repent, but we do not stake anything. We put no eggs in the basket of them repenting.
Yeah.
They should be defied. And so whether they repent or whether they don't repent, it doesn't matter towards what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're trying to abolish abortion on a state level. And in a lot of ways, it's almost better if it gets abolished outright on a state level because then it's criminalization and we're not dealing with pro-lifers who are putting in their lame bills during when it's overturned.
I just think there's a lot of circus around this and a lot of sort of like, we don't really care what they say. Yeah. But then yet like we kind of can fall into the trap of caring too much what they say. So just on record, before we analyze anything from the Dobbs v. Jackson thing, it's not going to modify like the pursuit of the abolitionist movement.
Yeah. The immutable obligation of every single person in America is to call for the immediate abolition of abortion of all of their magistrates.
Yeah.
That does not change based on anything that anyone at the Supreme Court, anything anyone in D.C., anyone anywhere says. That is immutable.
Yeah.
That comes from God's word. That comes from the Constitution. You must call for the immediate abolition of abortion.
Yeah.
So none of this matters in terms of what we do.
Yeah, and they're dangling a carrot just like pro-life presidents are, just like anybody else in politics are. They use abortion.
Who's they?
The Supreme Court. They're dangling a carrot. And so when they go and they review a case like a 15-week ban, and if they were to accept a compromise and give it, they're buying for themselves a little bit of credibility in the mind of a whole lot of pro-lifers.
Right.
And so people feed into that idea, we got something. Yeah. And there was people celebrating Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which was a wicked, evil decision when it happened. And there will be many people celebrating a compromise if that's what happens.
Yeah. And I think right now pro-lifers, like professional pro-lifers, lobbyists, activists and stuff, are kind of giddy with what's happening.
Yeah.
And feel pretty good about what's happening. So we need to get into that. But like in response to the question of like, okay, there are these 9 people that wear black dresses and they're like lifelong professional lawyers.
Yeah.
Do I want them to have the right view on whether abortion is murder or not? Sure. It'd be great if they're all like, yes, abortion's murder. It's bad. Do I think that they make laws? No, I don't. Do I think that their right to rule on the abortion issue is completely off the table? I do. I think they've completely delegitimized themselves as an institution on the issue of abortion, but it's not up to them in the beginning. I mean, I think this is a clear cut. Abortion is murder. It should be against the law. Lots of people over the past 50 years have used, but the Supreme Court says it's constitutional as an excuse to continue murdering children under the cover of laws. But in the United States of America, there are hundreds and hundreds of laws across the states that are written by legislators saying you can get an abortion for this reason, this reason, this reason. And all of those laws would just be sitting on the books, regardless of what the Supreme Court says.
Yeah.
So there's a sense where we want to start out saying, like, this is not as important as you think it is.
Yeah.
But in the previous paradigm of pro-choice, pro-life, jockeying over what the Supreme Court says, who's on the Supreme Court, this is extremely important to them.
Yeah. And my old boss doesn't even understand why we're talking about this right now, Mark Harrington. He doesn't get why we're talking about this. And just for the people who might wonder, hey, if you're so invested in ignoring Roe, why are you talking about this right now? We want people to understand that this is not that big of a deal right now. We want people to understand that putting this much attention on this thing is actually something that you need to stop doing, and you need to go into abolishing abortion immediately and stop putting your hope in it. Because we have people that are investing their faith in the court right now and saying, that's why you have that drawing showing pro-lifers and pro-choicers on either side of the aisle bowing down to their God, because they're really dependent on whether or not the Supreme Court allows them to do the right thing or not. And we're saying, you don't have to wait. You can do the right thing right now.
And as a result of this happening in the upcoming legislative session, when we go to House reps or senators and say, hey, you should file a bill protecting all preborn human beings, establish equal justice, equal protection for human beings in the womb. When we go to them, because of this, we're going to have, because this is not going to be ruled on probably until late in the spring of 2022, because of this, there are going to be people saying, I don't need to put forward a bill of abolition. I'm waiting on Dobbs v. Jackson. And some of those people will actually say, listen, I agree with you. Courts don't make laws, blah, 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 blah. But really, I'm going to wait and see what the Supreme Court says. So
that's why it's
a delaying mechanism.
That's why it's so crucially important that we understand that none of our actions should ever change based on what the Supreme Court says, because that's really important for any pro-life person who's watching, in terms of how instructive it is for what we need to be doing. Like, as abolitionists, as Christians, we need to be getting these legislators at the state level out of this mindset of wait for the court. Because, as we'll get to at the end of this episode, I think that by far the most likely outcome is kind of a compromise where they can just kind of move the line down to 15 weeks. And then the legislators will say,
incremental victory.
Incremental victory. So let's keep pursuing the incremental strategy and wait for the court to then move it down to 12 and down to 8, down to 9. And it's going to be this whole incremental crap for another, who knows how many decades.
And pro-life leaders will like send us messages and be like, look, what we're doing is working. And you're like, 50 freaking years and you got another increment. What we're doing is working. But again, we want to start with what we think should be done. What should be done, what the strategy or the ideology is, a state legislature and a state governor ought to, in accordance with the Constitution and the higher law, thou shalt not murder, they ought to begin protecting preborn human beings, because we all know that life begins at conception. You're human and you're alive and you're a unique image-bearing creature from the moment of conception, and you develop in the womb. From that moment all the way through, you should be protected by law, and nobody anywhere should have any special murder rights. So states should start doing that. And in response to the Supreme Court, they should say, here in the state of Oklahoma, Texas, Indiana, or wherever, here in our state, we're going to protect babies from murder. Regardless of your rulings and your opinions on that, this is what we're going to do. And they should pass those laws. They should enforce those laws. They should criminalize abortion. Yeah. And it shouldn't have anything to do with the Supreme Court. That's what we think they should do. And until they start doing that, we don't expect there to be any actual true ground gained.
Yep.
Yeah. And the problem with rulings like this is that when they start happening, we get kind of transfixed on them and we stop doing that other thing, or we never do that other thing. Yep. We try to get legislators to seek to establish justice, and they always tell us, like, well, no, Trump's president, so he's going to do it. The Supreme Court's going to be conservative, so they're going to do it. There's this ruling in the future, so they're going to do that. And you can call it a success, but that's been what's been going on for 50 years. Right. So the Holocaust has been sustained by putting, all your eggs in this basket.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So the problem here is the judicial idolatry. So that's why we're kind of starting off this episode. Yeah. We are going to analyze the court. We're going to analyze what the justices said, what the attorneys for each side said. Yeah. But it's very important to begin. None of this changes any aspect of what we need to be doing, what our biblical obligations are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much so that I didn't even watch it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I slept through.
Yeah.
The oral arguments of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Because I would rather be dreaming.
Mm-hmm. And I think an additional reason for why we're analyzing all these things is every single person that we're going to be pretty much almost every person that we're going to be looking at that was asking questions of the attorneys was celebrated by the pro-life movement without qualification. Like almost every single one of them, they were yelling and screaming and making a big noise about getting these people through. And so it is good to critically examine the justices. Yeah.
Neil Gorsuch is someone we like. Judge Kavanaugh, someone we like. The pro-life movement, basically. John Roberts, someone the pro-life movement liked.
Because the only analysis you're really getting of these justices and what the questions they're asking and what they should be doing is you've got the pro-life movement who has a unrealistic, way too optimistic view of them, and you've got the pro-abortion movement that's got these people are the devil type stuff. And really, like, a lot of that is for show, and it's like, well, we've done such a good thing, and blah, 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 blah. But none of them are honestly assessing what happened. And so it's good to be able to look at this honestly and say, this is what actually happened.
Yep. Yeah. Which is what we're going to do. So let's analyze the arguments, and I think we're gonna basically look what are the arguments that the pro-life Solicitor General of Mississippi made, and what are the responses from the justices.
Yeah, so let's get into the Solicitor General for Mississippi, a guy named Scott Stewart. So what was interesting, if he was going to be in line with kind of the historic strategy of the pro-life movement, he would say, well, just allow us to have this moderate regulation. But he actually was, we'll get to the bad in a minute, but it actually was good. He didn't ask them to, well, just allow this modest regulation, but don't go any further than that. He actually did say, no, overturn Roe completely because it's complete garbage.
Yeah, which is surprising because some of the briefs, the amicus briefs that were filed by the big, like, National Right to Life type organizations weren't even asking for that. They were like encouraging sort of the, just let the 15-week thing stand. And so I think from the get-go, Scott Stewart looks a little steel-balled, as we say in the abolition movement. Like he doesn't want to stand up and say, we're just here to move the line back. Yeah. So that was, I don't know if it's surprising. It may be a little bit expected that he would argue for more than what Americans United for Life or something like that asked him to do. But for full-blown overturning, that's pretty surprising. But he did stay with the pro-life movement in regards to, he wasn't calling for, like, criminalization. He wasn't calling for equal justice, equal protection, treating abortion as murder. That wasn't.
His argument is that the Constitution is neutral on abortion. And so the states should be allowed to allow abortion if they want to allow abortion, or they should be allowed to prohibit if they want to prohibit. They should be allowed to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
Now, we don't agree with that.
We don't agree with that. And someone actually...
The Constitution doesn't agree with that.
Yeah. It is, no one should agree with that. And someone who I think it was a friend, it was someone on Facebook that wasn't being a jerk or anything, but actually like wrote a status about this and said, well, like, isn't this what Free the States wants? You know, because our title is Free the States. So we must want it to go back to the states and have different states doing different things. And it's like, okay, I know we have a kind of a crazy name for our abolitionist organization, but the idea is that all the states are currently enslaved to judicial supremacy and are not allowed to criminalize abortion because they you know, they're not free, they're enslaved. A lot of that's in their own mind.
Yeah.
But we're
it's like
not saying
the slavery of sin type thing.
Yeah, it's more like we're enslaved to evil. But and we're not asking for them to be freed to like make decisions because like 14 states may decide to criminalize abortion and the others may not, and that's not like we're going to be like, oh, that's great, that's what we wanted. No, we actually want total abolition for the entire galaxy. But we do think that we do want to correct the idea that if the Supreme Court threw it back to the states, we'd be like, we got what we wanted.
Yeah.
Like, no. We don't even think it should be up to the Supreme Court to tell the states that they're allowed to do this.
Well, before we get too far from Scott Stewart's argument here, it's important to note this is an insanely evil argument. Like if you're actually thinking about your preborn neighbors as humans, and you have a chance to get before possibly the greatest tyrants in human history, and let's say it's some other issue. Let's say we're talking about slavery in America, and you argue these people don't have an inherent right within the Constitution. They don't have an inherent right to life or right to not be enslaved. Let's just turn this over to the states.
Yeah.
We all recognize now that's an evil, evil argument. Like stand on the word of God, look at what the Constitution actually says, and apply it, and tell these tyrants, you need to stop doing this. This is evil that you're doing this to children, and you need to repent on your face before God. Yeah. But instead what he's doing is, this is a neutral document. Like, how insanely wicked is that?
Yeah, if the Constitution is neutral on murder of the innocent, it's a bad document. We should be burning it.
Right, and the key thing there, the pro-abortion argument, they say, well, it's a great mystery when life begins, and different religions have different beliefs about when life begins. It's like, no, different religions and even people who profess Christ might say, well, I think we should be allowed to murder human beings at a certain point. But no one who's graduated 6th grade actually doesn't know when life begins. We all freaking know when life begins. Yeah. There is no mystery, and this is the big thing that Anthony Kennedy relied on in the Casey decision that he authored. He says, well, it's the grand mystery of life and liberty to decide the meaning of life for ourselves and when the beginning of life is.
Yeah.
It's like
it's a joke.
That's a joke. Like if that was a 6th grade philosophy paper, like that's the stupidest thing I've ever read in my life. Yeah. But he has like you said, a black dress on, so we think, oh, that's so profound. It's idiotic.
Yeah.
It's so dumb.
And when Scott Stewart stands up, he might actually be someone personally who says abortion's murder. Life begins at conception. Blah, blah, blah. But I just want it being sent back to the states to decide. It's like, no, you don't understand. If the United States is a nation of laws that believes that humans have rights and shouldn't be murdered, as a country, if that's what we believe and abortion's murder, then no state should be allowed to have special murder for preborn babies. Yep. So it's a weird thing to argue. So it shows that like, whereas we've gotten somewhere in that now pro-lifers are arguing for sort of like, more than just the increment, they still are kind of like appearing before the high court and arguing that this should be like up to like a popular vote.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's a bad view of government, and it's a bad science, bad philosophy, bad religion.
And there's a direct connection, and you can probably speak to it better than I could, but a direct connection to slavery, because you had the people, like you had the people who were hardcore anti-slavery abolitionists, you had the hardcore pro-slavery, people who owned slaves and who supported slavery. And then you had the people who were like, well, just let the states decide. And that was the Lincoln versus Douglas debates, right? Yeah. You had Douglas arguing that in the new states, just allow them to decide for themselves, and he did that knowing that they would vote for slavery. Right? Yeah. But he's arguing, well, just let the states do whatever they wanted to do on slavery. Yeah. And we recognize now that was awful. That was an awful, awful opinion that Stephen Douglas had, and no one should ever hold that when we're talking about the enslavement and the trafficking in human beings. That's obviously wrong, right? And I think it's just kind of still, again, Stewart was more aggressive than I would have even expected in going for complete overturning of Roe, but there's still a timidity there in not wanting to really go for the jugular. And what's really sad is that not going for the jugular. If you would have went for the jugular, it actually makes it more likely that he would have gotten the overturning of Roe. Yeah. And so it's good on principle to go for complete abolition. It's good for what the effects that might come from it. Yeah. It's good all around. Yeah. But they're just afraid of being too hardcore on it.
Yeah, and I think people want to believe that this is actually, that what they're doing up there in front of the Supreme Court is actually a debate, like it's two sides going at it in some way, but it's the same corrupt worldview underneath all of it. It's the same living document. The Constitution is a living document type thing. It's like, no, this is what it says. Like, you guys are pretending that it doesn't say what it says. Both of you are. You're operating from a secular worldview. You're operating from one that does not make any sense of human rights, and you're trying to move sand from place to place. You're not standing on a foundation. You're sinking. And there's nowhere that you're possibly going to go with that. You have to stand on the Word of God. You have to stand on the Constitution and say, this is what it says. You're just arguing different points in the same corrupt worldview. It's not even a matter of this is two worldviews in conflict with one another. Right. This is the same thing.
Yeah. And on the point that if he would have actually argued for full-blown equal protection criminalization, that would have been actually likely to overturn it. I mean, think about it. Not arguing for that, the justices can get together and say, all right, so they're saying that it should go back to the states. It shouldn't be a fundamental right. But if they're also saying that, like, different states can choose whether to do it or not do it, it must not be murder. Mm-hmm. Like, it must not be. Because if it were murder, if pro-lifers thought it were murder, they would be saying it shouldn't be legal anywhere. Yeah. So they must not think it's murder. Mm-hmm. So, like, taking that neutral ground does have the effect of basically taking the wind out of the sails of the entire argument.
Yeah. And even the people who are looking at the Constitution, who are trying to actually be a textualist, the justices that are looking at it, if there is any that are looking at it, honestly,
are there any?
They're hearing. Even the opposition is arguing that the Constitution is neutral on this question. Yeah. Okay, so we must not even have the option of considering it to be against the brutal murder of millions and
when
millions.
They could say the Constitution doesn't include the word abortion, but the Constitution does say that no person shall be deprived.
And that fact there, what's in the Constitution, plus everyone knows life begins at conception, which is another fact. Yeah. A plus B, the unavoidable conclusion C. Yeah. Abortion must be abolished, and everyone knows it.
But as I said at the outset of the program, the court reflects the culture, and so the culture wants abortion. So really what the court is doing is trying to figure out how much they like abortion, how much they want abortion, how they can continue to justify abortion with word games and by saying this or that about numbers of the Constitution, previous rulings, yada, yada, yada. So on the question of previous rulings, let's get into, the first thing that comes from Samuel Alito.
Yes.
Who?
So it's interesting. The pro-abortion attorneys argued along the lines that we would have expected them to. Yeah. So the U.S. Solicitor General, someone who's in the Biden administration, essentially in his Justice Department, was arguing. Was arguing on behalf of the pro-abortion side in this, and so she goes up and she's arguing for stare decisis, and it was interesting. She went all the way. So stare decisis is this idea that you should never or only in very extreme circumstances overturn a court opinion that you've already given in the past. Yeah. And so
to keep the court relevant. Right. Or to keep because if you start undermining your previous decisions, then it's like you've delegitimized the court.
Right.
So we got to keep it real.
Yeah. And so she makes the argument that you can never overturn a previous ruling unless there's new information that proves that the facts that were considered in that case were wrong. So you can only overturn if the facts of the case have changed and you recognize that the conclusion was based on wrong facts. You can't just say, well, the facts were right, but the conclusion was wrong. You have to actually have wrong facts in the decision to overturn it. And so Alito, who is one of the more conservative guys on the court, he responds to, well, if that's the case, you're saying that we couldn't overturn Plessy v. Ferguson. So Plessy v. Ferguson was an 1896 case, basically where the Supreme Court said that states can mandate segregation. So they can say that black people can only, drink from these water fountains and all that evil stuff, right? And so that wasn't overturned until 1954, like 58 years later. And so Alito asked her, well, if you can't overturn a case unless the facts have changed, you're saying that if the same case had come along 1 year later, so in 1897, they should have upheld, state mandated segregation just because they'd done it before. Now, she's a pro-abortion attorney, but she can't say, well, yeah, they should have kept segregation. She can't say that.
Yeah, because she plays that card. Yeah, like she's a social justice warrior or whatever. But like it's funny. She's also smart enough to know, oh, you've got me in this thing where I have to basically admit that no, I do believe that an unjust, wicked ruling can be overturned just because it's wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Slavery, segregation, they're wrong. They should be overturned, not on the basis of new facts, just on the basis of they were wrong decisions. And it's like reading the transcript. It's just like, oh, she's dancing around. She's avoiding it.
Yep.
He actually just said, can you give me a yes or a no?
Yeah, they spent about 2 minutes going back and forth, and then he eventually says, we've been talking about this. I still don't understand your answer. Can you give me a yes or no? Can a court overrule its things just because the decision
the
was
year
wrong?
after Plessy versus Ferguson, if the Brown v. Board of Education thing came up, could the court have just said, oh, no, actually, white supremacy and segregation are bad?
Yeah.
Could they have done that?
Yeah.
And she's like, she answers some other question.
Yes, she eventually. So she says, well, the court might have overruled it if it came back 1 year later. And then he goes, well, so you're saying they can overrule it? And then she switches and she goes to, well, no, it's never happened before.
And then she did double down.
She switches. Mm-hmm. She answers a different question than he answers. She didn't want to answer his direct question
because she needs stare decisis. Which the arguing for stare decisis, like, listen. We all know abortion's wrong. It's murder. Life begins at conception. It's really bad, and it's not constitutional, and it should be criminalized. But we can't win those arguments against those things. So what we're going to do is argue, well, we have to stick with our wrong decision.
Yeah, because
that's what we do.
It's consistent with viewing the court as God. It's like, how can my God change his mind?
Yeah. Oh,
they've
yeah.
already
Perfect.
decided. They've decided from on high, and nothing is going to change because they're God.
If we do this, it'll be like saying the Supreme Court's not God.
Yeah.
And if the Supreme Court's not God, people are going to be running around just law and order is just going to be out the window or whatever.
And the important thing there is the Supreme Court wants to be God. Right? That's the important point. And so that's why they're so hesitant to overrule themselves. Now, Alito is obviously he's going against that. He's kind of going against that grain here, which is good. But typically, that's why the court almost never overrules previous opinions. It's very, very rare.
Yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, and Sonia Sotomayor, she says about this, like the idea of stare decisis and being consistent on this, it would ruin the court. The court would be over if they changed their mind.
It's like we will die if we.
Yeah.
The court will not survive if stare decisis doesn't survive.
A bunch of worshipers of a certain institution see inconsistency in their God, and that breaks our minds.
Yeah.
How can they be inconsistent on this point?
Yeah, you see this in like TV shows where like cults and cult leaders, like the cult leader in the show like has some kind of affair or something like that, and then the other top people in the cult have to keep it secret because we can't let it out of the bag that we're not the moral. It's just like that. They're just protecting themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so her direct quote here is, How will the court survive? Will the institution of the court survive the stench that this creates in public perception that the Constitution and its readings are just political? And so what she's arguing there is what they argued in Planned Parenthood v. Casey.
Yeah.
So she's saying
the political hack that she is too. Like she's legislating from the bench from her entire time in there.
Right.
Oh, this is going to look political.
Right.
You hypocrite.
So she's saying that we look political if we change our minds because it looks like we're bowing to public pressure and we're bowing to the anti-abortion forces who are making us do this or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it's like, no, this is what the Constitution actually says. What was political was you saying, there's a right to child sacrifice in the Constitution. Yeah. That was political. There is no abortion in the Constitution. There is nothing even coming close to resembling a right to murder children in the womb in the Constitution. To legalize abortion was constitutional. That is what lost all of their authority. As you mentioned earlier, they have no legitimacy.
And the only way for them to get that legitimacy back is not stare decisis. Ironically, it's the opposite. If they said, hey, in 1972, we caved to the culture of death after the sexual revolution, and we gave this country abortion on demand, that court was wrong. That was unconstitutional. That was depriving innocent human beings of the right to life. That was a bad decision. Here's a good decision. That's the only way they get their legitimacy back. And again, like they say that's great. But I think they're illegitimate, and I think we should, do what we need to do regardless. But if they were to do that, they would get a modicum of respect back for the institution of the Supreme Court.
So that's what Alito and Sotomayor kind of had a back and forth.
And I don't think that's ever happened before.
Like, think that's happened?
That sort of the justice sitting on the bench being sort of like cavalier, like Supreme Court can be wrong. We were
very
wrong.
Rare.
Like you don't. So abolitionists,
they don't even do that when they're in their confirmation hearings. Like they'll bow to the idea of stare decisis until the cows come home because they want to get on the bench, you know, and they think it's required that
because they know that stare decisis is, as it's being here, an argument. Like you can't really argue that abortion's okay, but you can argue for stare decisis. And so, but I do think that for the past 5 mainly, but even 10 years, the fact that the culture has been being bombarded with arguments like just because the Supreme Court says it doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's right. That sentiment has made it all the way up to like a justice on the court is saying when the court's wrong, we should be, pound sand. Like, I mean, it's like he's up there saying, no, we could be dead wrong. I didn't watch it. It was happening. I read the transcript later. While my kids were crawling on me and stuff, we were like playing. I kind of read it, whatever. But like,
you don't want to admit that you had anything to do with knowing anything about it.
I was like, James is going to make me get on a show and talk about this thing. I should be somewhat familiar with the arguments. But when I was reading it, I was like, oh man, is he going to bring up Dred Scott? He didn't bring up Dred Scott because because Dred Scott they didn't overturn. See, that's what I'm saying. The country moved forward and Dred Scott's still on the books. Runaway slaves, you got to be returned to your masters.
According to the Supreme Court.
According to the Supreme Court, you black people are not even fit to be citizens, Supreme Court says, still in the books. But the fact that he did bring up Plessy v. Ferguson because that one was overturned. But it did take, 50 years. So the fact that he did that is noteworthy. And I hope that encourages more and more regular folks to kind of repeat those arguments, because that argument would be valid even in the event that they rule incorrectly on this one. Like Governor Kevin Stitt should be like, well, the Supreme Court's wrong. I mean, can't they change it? And like use the Plessy v. Ferguson argument. So that was great. Now, who's usually great on these things, and the guy that we not completely agree with, but tend to agree with more frequently and appreciate would be Clarence Thomas. He has pretty much consistently argued that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision, that there is no constitutional right to murder your children. He also had the opportunity to make some great arguments against the pro-abortion attorney, Julia Rickleman.
So you had Alito responding to the pro-abortion argument for stare decisis, and then you had Clarence Thomas did a real number on the argument that they were making for bodily autonomy, which is the other main argument they focused on.
Showed the hypocrisy.
Right. And so this lady, Julie Rickleman, she's a attorney for, I believe, the Center for Reproductive Rights, and she's arguing the pro-abortion side, and she says, she's arguing for freedom, choice, liberty. Of course, they never finished the sentence.
Murder.
Choice to murder.
But
anyway, she's arguing for freedom and liberty and autonomy and choice to murder human beings. And Clarence Thomas says, well, okay, if it's about choice, if it's all about the woman's choice, then what do we do with a mother who ingests drugs prior to viability, say 8, 12, anywhere before 20 weeks, she ingests drugs that permanently harm the unborn child. Should the state governments have the right to hold that as a criminal act?
Because they do.
Yes, because they do.
They already do.
Yep. And she fully admits, yes, states have the right to regulate drugs that harm unborn children.
Now, what if she's taken those drugs to purposely harm her unborn children? Oh, well, then it's fine.
Right. So you can't do something that might or might not give your child maybe some sort of disability, but you can rip off their head. You can poison them to death, right? Yeah. It's the insanity of the pro-abortion argument, and it shows, again, everyone knows life begins at conception. Yeah. And again, to make the parallel in history, there were white supremacists who wanted black people to not have the rights and protections that everyone else gets,
but to count for votes,
to count as people for the purpose of counting the people in a state so that they get more votes and more power in Congress.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the same legal schizophrenia that white supremacists had.
It's similar to a question I used to ask on campus all the time. I'd ask, you get these very uptight and angry SJW types, and I'd say, hey, if I had an art project and I went in and if I was a pregnant lady, I had an art project and I went in and I just ripped off one of the legs of my preborn baby, would that be okay? And she said, no, that would be horrible. Okay, so I can't harm them, but I can kill them.
Yeah.
And they just don't know what to do with it. It's like their mind is like exploding because the logic there is just non-existent.
Yeah, it's like I'm in California and I'm using the bathroom and there's like a sign on the door that says, it's like a don't smoke when you're pregnant. And you're like, don't smoke when you're pregnant? But you can murder them. I mean, it's that schizophrenia.
This is California. Preborn children don't count.
It's weird.
There's no preborn children here. They don't exist.
So Alito wrecks the argument for stare decisis. Thomas wrecks the argument for bodily autonomy.
Yep.
And again, that these things are happening, not just like on Facebook, but like at the Supreme Court, is good. I mean, like, again, I don't care really about their ruling, but I do care that like people who are tuning in, like, are going, oh, that is really dumb that, like, I argue for the right to abortion and then I get all uppity whenever I see a pregnant woman drinking. Yeah. Like, something's off here. Like, I'm messed up. And so that stuff was pointed out. Like, things, just because they're rulings doesn't make them right. And you're being crazily inconsistent.
Yeah. And you know that that's a human being in there.
Yeah. And so now those things happening should immediately flow into, therefore, abortion ought to be abolished.
Yeah.
But the court themselves and everyone involved in this is as hypocritical as the person arguing for bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
Because it's just like Scott Stewart's thing. Like, wait a second. If abortion's murder, it shouldn't be up to the states.
Yeah. And I have one interesting bit of insight, actually, that I just learned earlier today on this point, actually. So Clarence Thomas, in the past, back in the Carhart case in 2000, he actually argued against the idea that the Constitution outlaws abortion. He said that states can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But he was trying to uphold the regulation in that case, but he was arguing that states don't have to abolish abortion. They can do whatever they want. Now,
which we would disagree with.
Right. And so I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today, and he actually he's a lawyer at a pretty important law firm, and so he actually wants to stay under the radar. So I'm not gonna name him, but he's one of the very influential lawyers making the case for this idea that the Constitution does outlaw abortion. And I was talking to him, and he was hopeful that Thomas would actually endorse that view. You know, he would support the majority decision, but he would also write a separate concurrence saying, no, but we actually should have gone further and actually abolished abortion. And I asked him, well, you know, what makes you say that he might say that? Because back in 2000, he completely rejected that view. And this guy tells me, well, I know all 4 of his current law clerks, his 4 clerks for this year, and all of them support this view that the Constitution outlaws abortion. And so that's actually an interesting note that all 4 of Thomas's clerks believe that. And he also said that 2 of Alito's clerks believe the Constitution outlaws abortion. And clerks do have some influence. Obviously, they're not the ones who make the ultimate vote for what's going to happen in the case, but they do have influence.
Yeah, I mean, massive influence.
Yeah.
Now the question is like without getting into, I mean, because like this is what he's saying about these people, so it's not super factual, but pretty much what we'd expect from Clarence Thomas. Yep. It's likely that he's going to write an opinion that once again includes like, listen, Roe v. Wade was wrong, you know, but it still seems as though even with this inside information that he's going to either fall on, you know, it should go back to the states or it's unconstitutional. But if he says it's unconstitutional, I think that would be a slight update, but no one seems to be joining him. We could put his clerks on the Supreme Court. Just, you know, then they'd be joining him. Now, John Roberts, who I'm old enough to remember when John Roberts was the cause celeb of the pro-life industry. And we should remind them, anyone watching this, that when John Roberts was being inducted into the Supreme Court,
pro-life Hall of Fame.
Yeah, into the Pro-Life Hall of Fame, the Supreme Court. Pro-lifers were arguing that he's a great choice. They were endorsing him, national right to life, and pro-aborts were losing their minds. We can't put this guy on there. He's going to kill Roe v. Wade. When was that? What year was that?
It was George Bush, and it was George Bush's first appointment. So I think it would have been 2001, 2002-ish.
Yeah. So he's been on there for quite some time. And so Chief Justice John Roberts has, without going back through his entire record, has been basically, I think, even to pro-lifers, a supreme disappointment.
Yeah, John Roberts, I would point to three cases on how disgustingly awful of a justice John Roberts is. The first one where I think people started to sense, oh crap, he is totally on the left here. It was Obamacare. His betrayal on Obamacare was unreal.
Because he did exactly the opposite of what all the pundits on the conservative side expected him to do.
And so that's when we got a sense, okay, he's really in no way like a conservative justice here. But then you had in 2020, you had even an abortion case on a completely inconsequential regulation, a stupid regulation that barely does anything. And he says, well, no, because of sorry decisis, I actually don't agree with striking down this regulation. And 4 years ago, in 2016, in the Hellerstedt case, he voted to uphold the same regulation. But in 2020, he goes, yes, I know I voted for this regulation, but it's now court precedent. We can't go against it. And so that was in 2020. And so now it's like, holy cow, he's striking down even the stupidest, most meaningless abortion regulations. Yeah,
the greatest idolaters of the Supreme Court are on the Supreme Court. Like that's basically what he's just like, listen, I mean, I voted against this, but I didn't win. So I got to vote for it now.
Insane stuff.
But, you know, he is protecting his job, his institution.
And then one more case, you had the transgender rights case where he voted with the liberal justices and with Justice Neil Gorsuch, actually, another Republican appointed guy, to basically make the Equality Act law. So basically to enshrine transgenderism as a protected class and give them basically extra rights above what everyone else gets and completely go against religious liberty. And so you had Roberts and Gorsuch going for that. And so now it's like, okay, you can't really say that the Supreme Court has a 6-3 conservative majority. John Roberts is on the left. Like he is a left-wing justice.
He's as bad, worse because he's, you know, got in there. And so whenever people say that...
You guys just got to vote pro-life and get the presidents in there.
That's true.
It's not...
we should.
Critical.
I just because, you know, you're getting messages from like pro-life leaders and stuff, you know, I don't open them if I get them, but like you guys do, you're crazy. But like we should remind people as much as we possibly can. George W. Bush was a pro-lifer. He was in office. He had the Senate. He had the House. He had the Supreme Court. There have been times in history where it was as good as it is now or better. And pro-lifers, just that theory, like someone wants to say, yes, now we're gonna win, you know, like, oh yeah, if you're betting, man, this is not something you'd want to bet on, because John Roberts has gone John Roberts. But you know who else could become John Roberts? Neil Gorsuch.
Or Brett Kavanaugh.
Or Amy Coney Barrett. The only one that I don't think is ever going to change is Clarence Thomas, you know, and maybe Samuel. They're showing.
He's the only one who has, Clarence Thomas, the only one who's ever said Roe should be overturned.
Yep.
The other justices, Republican appointed,
Oh,
have voted to uphold certain regulations, but none of them have ever joined Clarence Thomas's opinions that Roe should be overturned. He's always been completely alone.
And you know, we know the pride of people is you know, stench to high heaven, but like guys like Neil Gorsuch, like in their confirmation hearings, basically said, I'm not going to overturn this. But they still get the support of pro-lifers because pro-lifers are like,
he's just saying that to get in.
He's just saying that to get in.
And
it's like, no, he's actually not. He's got to he's got to uphold what he said.
Yeah. The actual insanity of that, like thinking, oh, he's just trying to get in. It's like, you actually believe that all the babies that are going to die depend on this. So why wouldn't you say, you better say, I think it's unconstitutional to kill babies under, and it should not be allowed. Yeah. That's the standard. You don't go and say, oh, he's just pretending. You don't know that. You're not inside his head.
Why are you practicing cunning anyway? I mean, golly, for crying out freaking loud. When you're being confirmed for the Supreme Court,
oh, he's just a liar. He's just a liar. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. He's a liar. Oh, we trust him in the future.
Yeah.
So John Roberts, I think, is representative of probably the compromise position.
Yep.
So he is the one who floats the idea of maybe just upholding what Mississippi is suggesting, a 15-week ban.
Yep. And so what this case is probably going to come down to, so again, we've talked about that there could be some betrayals. John Roberts could totally betray maybe Brett Kavanaugh or Neil Gorsuch or somebody and uphold Ron Casey completely. But assuming that doesn't happen, assuming that the 6 Republican appointed justices actually do vote to uphold the law, the question becomes, do the other 4 justices follow Clarence Thomas in wanting to completely overturn Roe, or do they follow John Roberts with this kind of compromise route where we uphold this law banning abortion at 15 weeks, but we maintain the undue burden standard? We just roll basically
an increment.
So we roll it from viability around 20 weeks down to 15 weeks.
And because incrementalism is the thing that pro-lifers love. It's the thing that, you know, like, hey, I'm going to say it because it's no longer November. I really like Doug Wilson. Got a great beard, wrote a lot of good books. But Doug Wilson is for incrementalism. Is so long as you say we're going to do more. Yeah. All of this pro-incrementalism, pro-life training in the culture tells John Roberts, Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, it tells them, Brett Kavanaugh, we can uphold a 15-week ban, and we will be celebrated as pro-life heroes. Yeah. It'll be great. Abortion will still be legal. You're going to be allowed to murder your children for like 15 weeks, which is a long time, and most abortions happen before 15 weeks. Most of them happen before 10 weeks.
Yeah. Well, that's what Amy Coney Barrett even said when she was a law professor. She said she doesn't even think it's a matter of, like, it's not even a discussion of whether it's overturning now. It's just how much can you allow? And that's what her position on what the court was allowed even to do now was just discussing how do we regulate.
Yeah. So they're pro-lifers, and they're going to try to get what the pro-life movement has been demanding, increments. Yeah. And they may get those increments and say they want to do more later in the future. And pro-lifers may celebrate the ruling. Hey, they uphold Mississippi's 15-week ban, which is going to allow all the states to put in 15-week bans. But that will be the travesty of all travesties, because then it'll just be like state after state saying, well, I want to do this. Hey, this is exciting. Let's do this. Let's save lives. And in states like Oklahoma, when you can look at the stats, abortions after 15 weeks are not common in Oklahoma. You can do 5,000 abortions a year, all before 15 weeks.
The vast majority of abortionists don't even want to do 15-week abortions.
Yeah, the abortionist that worked for 39 years or whatever, or I guess 40 years here in Norman, only does them up to 12 weeks. Because you only really have to, you don't need more than 15 weeks, which is funny because that's where one of the arguments went. They said, well, wait, is 15 weeks not enough time?
Right. And so Roberts really tipped his hand pretty transparently in this, that he wants this compromise route. So he's asking one of the pro-abortion attorneys, he's saying, well, is 15 really even that hard? Like, I think his direct quote was, if it's about choice, how is 15 weeks not enough time to make the choice? I think that was close to his word for word quote. And the attorney said, well, see, it's not just about the 15-week ban, because the pro-lifers are coming at 12 weeks, and they're coming at a heartbeat at 8 weeks, and they're doing all this stuff
to smash mouth, man.
Smash mouth. They're trying to go beyond 15 weeks. And Roberts goes, no, don't talk about any of that stuff. I just want to focus on the 15-week ban. How is the 15-week ban really any different from the current viability line?
Because saying someone has 15 weeks to make a decision isn't an undue burden.
Right.
Like, you can argue that. You can probably argue it down to 12 or 10, or I don't know. Like, you get 4 weeks after you know you're pregnant, sort of like, and it's not an undue burden. And then, so, he's tipping his hand. I mean, he's basically saying, this is what I'm going to write.
Right, and he did that. He also, I think a couple different times during the oral arguments, he said things along the lines of, Roe and Casey, basically the standard that they set up doesn't have to be tied to viability. And so almost everything he said was setting the stage for this compromise route that he wants to do. Basically untether the undue burden standard from viability and then reattach it at 15 weeks. Yeah. That's what Roberts was very clear. That's what he wants to do.
And if so go put a little tinfoil hat on here for a second, and let's just pretend that powers and principalities in high places
are real.
Imagine that. And they're behind things like this, and they have influence. And let's just say John Roberts is under their influence and part of this evil and perverse generation. The thing to do to keep abortion legal and happening at the same rate with the same laws protecting it would be to allow this.
Exactly that.
Like, allow it. Pro-lifers and their followers will all be led to celebrate it.
When you say allow this, you mean allow the 15-week
allow the 15-week ban to stand. Allow states to change the line. Like, change the line from 24 weeks to 15 weeks, which they've already kind of allowed. Like, I mean, they've allowed it to go down to 20 weeks. You know, they've upheld dismemberment abortion bans in lower courts.
Yeah.
And so basically saying the central doctrine of Roe v. Wade, mothers have a right to determine whether they remain pregnant or not, will be upheld.
Yep.
Abortion will be upheld. We're just now saying that here in 2022, we have enough knowledge and ability, and abortion's prevalent enough that 15 weeks is enough time. It will not affect abortion
in any way, but the pro-lifers get to say, look, the incremental strategy is working, and they keep doing the incremental strategy that isn't working, but he gives them a pretend victory.
Yeah, and it'll delay abolition.
You're giving another reason that those justices who are obsessed with stare decisis can look to. They can look to this decision if they make the compromise and say, oh, we again doubled down on this precedent. Yeah. So as far as like reversing this thing, you're losing hope with every single time that they double down.
Yeah. And so pro-life champions like Toby Sumpter can be like, yes, praise God. Thank God for the 15-week abortion ban. Let's go get a 12-week ban next time. Mm-hmm. And that is what they've been doing for 50 years, and that's what they have to stop. Yep. And it encourages them. And so, of course, back to the powers and principalities thing, what is the thing that would delay abolition the most? Mm-hmm. Passing a 15-week ban, take the wind out of the sails. We go to the Capitol and say, hey, Oklahoma, you should criminalize abortion. It's murder. You believe it's murder? And they're like, yeah, I believe it's murder. But the Supreme Court, and isn't it great? So instead of this total abolition bill you're giving me to file, I'm just going to file a version of the
15-week,
the Mississippi bill. Yeah. So that's, and that's what John Roberts is signaling.
And again, Christians believe this is an option, so I'm going to do it. That's what it is.
And I am not going to get any flack. John Roberts knows that he's only going to get flack from sort of the radicals or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think it's important to explain specifically why the upholding the 15-week ban but not doing anything beyond that is actually worse than just striking it down. Because if they just straight up strike it down, you'll have a lot of pro-life people who are like, holy cow, we've put all our eggs in this basket.
Even incrementalism doesn't work. Yeah, I know, it doesn't.
Right.
Thank you. Join us.
And so their eyes would open and see, holy cow, the Supreme Court, what an absolute fraud this whole, like, just vote for pro-life justice is because they'll overturn Roe. What a fraud that is. And they'll say, okay, well, let's just ignore the court. And
they'll stop doing it. Yep.
You'll have people's eyes opening and the mindset coming around to what it should be more if that happens. And so that would be better. The worst case is to pretend to look like they're giving pro-lifers a victory so pro-lifers are happy without actually giving any victory. That's the worst case here by far.
Yeah, which, and you know, it's kind of jumping to the end, but I'll re-say it at the end. But I mean, it's actually, it would be better for the culture if John Roberts turned around and wrote an opinion. Not only are we going to allow abortion after 15 weeks, we're going to allow it for 4 weeks after birth. Like if the Supreme Court made that ruling, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Because people would be like, they're evil. Yeah, they are evil.
Yeah.
Allowing babies to be murdered 4 weeks after their due dates is evil. And 4 weeks before their due dates or 4 seconds after conception, it's all evil.
No less evil.
So exposing this sort of game and this unfruitful deeds of darkness is one of the reasons why I get so miffed when people, you know, get so interested in this, is because it's like I see it all as a mechanism of delaying abolition. Like it's just a game. We're going to come up with some kind of a 15-week thing or something, blah, 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 and it's going to make the work of abolitionists harder. Like this is going to make the work of abolitionists harder because we're going to make it look like we're not evil. And those abolitionists are just saying we're evil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the problem here. I think John Roberts is like the perfect, you want to know what the fruit of the pro-life movement is, like what they say, what they do, what they celebrate. What does that produce? It produces John Roberts. Yeah. And Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch are basically just earlier on John Roberts, like, you know.
It's a strong possibility, yeah. I mean, especially with the way that Neil Gorsuch turned on transgenderism, that was pretty stunning to almost everybody. So there's no reason that both of them couldn't end up being just as bad as John Roberts. Yeah. And what's interesting about Kavanaugh, so obviously the hit on Gorsuch is he turned on transgenderism. If he turned on that, he can turn on this. Yeah. But with Kavanaugh, he told Susan Collins, who he needed to vote for him to get confirmed because he was right on the edge of being confirmed or not confirmed.
And she was the Republican pro-choicer.
Yes, from Maine, who's saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to uphold you or I'm going to vote for you to be confirmed or not. Mm-hmm. And so he tells her, well, or she asks him, is a 5-4 majority enough to overturn Roe? Would you vote to overturn Roe with only 5 votes? And he said, no, if you're going to overturn a huge precedent, you need at least 6. And that's what he tells Susan Collins. He said that to her in private, and then she goes public, and she said, look, I just talked to John Roberts the other day. Or I talked to Brett Kavanaugh the other day.
Yeah. And that's why I can vote for him, you people who support me as a pro-choice Republican.
Right. Mm-hmm. I am going to vote to confirm Kavanaugh because he will only overturn precedent if there's at least 6 votes. Mm-hmm. So John Roberts, I don't think is a vote to overturn Roe at all. I think it's very unlikely. And with that being, you got John Roberts not supporting it, the 3 liberals not supporting it. You only have 5. And so Brett Kavanaugh's already said he won't do it unless there's 6.
Yeah, and what an insanely arbitrary standard too. Like, why would you ever tell her that? Where do you get that from? You just made that up. And it's all your opinion that you are forcing onto the whole court. Yeah. Where do you get this? Where is it written that you have to have 6?
And how insane is it that somebody who's being sort of considered to be a justice, someone who sits in judgment of right and wrong. Yeah. Hey guys, I can vote for him because it turns out this guy doesn't really rule on whether things are right or wrong. He rules basically on whether there's a majority or not.
Yeah, and that should be telling
so he's got my vote.
This should be telling to the pro-life movement, look, he just said his stupid opinion might make this decades longer. Like it might be decades before you get another justice on there, and that's the difference between you winning and losing. And his stupid opinion is the thing that's standing in the way. Yeah,
and the Illuminati can always just kill off one of the conservatives and replace him. Well, Biden's. I mean, that's really. Oh, sorry, full hat. Got it. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know what the Illuminati's doing in all this, but maybe nothing. So, but Brett Kavanaugh did.
He did give some input.
He gave some input.
Yeah,
and the input was, as a good pro-lifer, he makes sure to, like, no, okay, just to be clear, with Stewart, we're not arguing for the total abolition of abortion. We're not arguing for criminalization here.
Yeah.
Okay? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So that was, I think he may have had one or two other lines, but I think that was pretty much it, was just clarifying, as you said, with the Mississippi attorney. So, right, you're not arguing for abortion's abolition. You're not arguing that abortion is unconstitutional, right? All you're saying is the Constitution is neutral.
And Scott Stewart basically is like, that's right.
Yep.
You're just like, oh, great. This is going to be in the history books.
Yeah.
And
Neil Gorsuch had little to nothing to say at all. The one thing he did say was he actually asked a clarifying question about what the pro-abortion attorneys thought about John Roberts' compromise scheme. And so he basically said, what do you think of that scheme that Roberts is talking about? And they explained why they thought it was bad and it should remain viability or whatever. But he was testing the waters on that. I think we can pretty much safely give an analysis of Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Roberts are, kind of telling us kind of where they're going.
Yeah.
And testing the waters, basically saying, we're going to try to have this 15-week thing. And so uphold it. It'd be a compromise. It could be a good thing. We want to see what the blowback might be. Like it's almost as like Kavanaugh, Gorsuch is going, would even the pro-choicers kind of be okay with this? It's like a weird.
That's what he was wondering. Yeah.
He's just like, which really they have to freak out and act like the sky's falling.
Right.
Like 15 weeks isn't enough time to decide whether or not to smash your preborn child. It's like, secretly it's like they've got to think to themselves, well, yeah, if it's between that and total abolition, but they're never going to say that.
Yeah. They've
got to argue, because they basically argued that if a woman doesn't have the right to abort her baby up to the moment of birth, she's a second-class citizen. She's in a coffin already or something like that. So they got to do that, because this is all politics. It's all culture.
Yeah.
Amy Coney Barrett, we got to move on to.
Right. So we got kind of the last of the Republican appointed justices here to kind of analyze. And she, like Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, kind of as new justices typically do, she didn't have a ton to say. Her input was along the lines of, you pro-abortion attorneys, you're saying children are this awful thing for a woman's life, and it's this huge burden that women could never be able to bear and still have a life, all this stuff. But she points out, well, there's always adoption. There's always, there's safe haven laws that are expanding all around the country. There's all these things. It doesn't. There's a principled point that maybe she should have made. Which I guess she feels that she can't, because she's a justice, got to be impartial. But that's evil. You're just treating children like this awful thing in a person's life. No, children and family are a blessing. But she kind of focused more on the pragmatic argument of no, it doesn't have to be any sort of burden at all, because you can just give them up for adoption.
Oh yeah, I was trolling. I was scrolling. I wasn't trolling CNN.
Trolling.
I was scrolling through CNN just to read them losing their minds. And there was one of their pundits or someone had tweeted something like, I've had a baby before. I felt like my guts were falling out. It was so painful, blah, blah. How in the world can you force someone to do that? And you're like, you freaking idiot. Every single person on the planet's been born. What are you talking about? How are we treating childbirth as this sort of wicked thing that happens? And so she's kind of has the opportunity to push back on that a little bit, but her comments about adoption and stuff like that, she's just sort of saying things that that's not the question. The question isn't about we're not talking about that at all, but pro-lifers do that. We see that in sort of these Southern Baptist Convention things where, hey, let's make a resolution to abolish abortion, to back total abolition of abortion. And somebody in the Southern Baptist churches or whatever stands up and says, we at this Crisis Pregnancy Center, we've seen a lot of adoptions and stuff. And she's like, okay, not really to the point. Thank you for your input. The question is should we be supporting abolition or regulation? So she just kind of said pro-lifey things, and I think she is representative of where a lot of pro-lifers are. Yeah. I can't remember who it was in one of these conventions. It's we don't really need to be focusing on whether it's criminalized or not criminalized. What we really need to be focusing on is helping women who make the choice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
to like find other people to raise their babies and stuff.
Yeah.
And just kind of sidestep the whole thing,
Yeah.
which I don't know. I guess I bet you some pro-lifers were expecting her to be better than that, but I bet you a lot of them are actually happy with her.
Yeah. Well, just as a point on the next three that we talk about, just overall here of the liberal justices on the court, it's important to point out here, I think, that they may not have gotten quantity on the court over time, but they certainly got quality from their perspective. The left got exactly what they wanted. They are dogmatists for leftist agenda.
Yeah.
And that is it like religious zealots for the left's agenda. And I would wonder, like, the pro-lifers should ask themselves, why do they suck so much at getting people that are as down the line strong on all the many issues that you have to be conservative Christian on, and the left is so dang good at it.
Yeah, a liberal justice in their hearings can say, yes, I believe abortion is a human right and it's constitutional.
Yeah,
and I'm gonna fight for it. I will fight like hell for abortion.
Yeah.
Like the left will get people like that. We get people on our side going like, no, I'm not gonna overturn Roe, but I hope you think that I will. But not. You know?
And this may seem harsh to a lot of people, but the reality is they are far better at serving Satan than you are at serving God. You're terrible at serving God by comparison to them serving Satan. They go and they do evil and they serve the father of lies and death and murder, and they're doing it a whole lot better than you're doing service to God.
They're into being consistent with their evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to kind of put the numbers on it. So roughly half.
Glad you said that though.
Yeah, it is a good point. About half of the Republican appointees since Roe have been appointed under the impression that they were going to be super duper pro-life who overturned Roe, and almost half of them have turned out to support Roe. You had 2 of Ronald Reagan's 3 appointees voted in favor of Roe in the Planned Parenthood v. Casey decision.
He's the most pro-life president in history.
Most pro-life president ever.
Until Donald Trump.
Until Trump. And you had George H.W. Bush went 1 for 2.
Oh, he's actually the most pro-life.
They all are whenever they're up for getting elected. And so you have all of these Republican appointed justices turning to the left once they get confirmed onto the court, but 100% of the Democrat appointees always support, like you said, they always support abortion, everything the left wants. And so the reason for that...
And they're not worried about it. Like left people are not worried about it.
Right.
It could, like, we're like, man, these guys could go against us.
Yeah.
The left's like, they're not going to go against us.
It's because they hold the hard standard. In those confirmation hearings, they flip out if there is any deviation from their standard that's coming out of the mouth of that nominee. Republicans, as you mentioned, they are like happy if the Republican appointee says leftist things because they just say, well, they're just saying that to get confirmed. And so we don't have to hold them to any kind of standard because they're just saying it because they have to or whatever. And they don't hold any standard on their nominees. And so that's why you have almost half of them turning to the left after they get confirmed.
And I would argue that the reason for it is because the vast majority of pro-lifers and the vast majority of people who consider themselves conservatives don't love God that much, and they don't love his law that much because they're not offended when people argue against it. You should be offended that someone is saying something against the law of your king, and you're not.
Yeah.
Like, that should make you angry. He's your king. You're supposed to serve him, and here you are arguing less than what he would have you do, and you're doing it worse than the servants of the enemy. Like, they have a shifting cultural ground that their dogma is evolving. Yours doesn't change. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. There's a book you can read. It shows you all the things that you're supposed to believe, and you cannot stick to it.
But you just say that you hold to it. You just say, I hold to this thing, but then in this realm, I kind of break it for the sake of doing, like, do a little evil for good. And that's why the Bible's so filled with arguments against being that way. Yeah. Because God knows that's the way we are. We practice cunning. We play games. We don't trust in him. We make iniquitous decrees and all this kind of stuff. And so you're right. The left is hardcore, consistent evil, and the right professes to be good when they are not. Yeah. It's just as clear as day. Yeah. But I mean, I don't think that it's impossible or outside of the realm of possibilities, like for the gospel, for some left appointed justice to sort of change. But I think
that would be bigger than Kanye right there.
Well, yeah, if Kanye can. Let's not go into Kanye. Is his name even Kanye anymore? Yeah. But like, yeah, I'm not holding my breath for it or anything like that. But I do think it is as likely for a full-blown liberal Democrat to become a proponent of abolishing abortion as it is for a pro-lifer. Like, people think that's crazy. It's like, no, pro-lifers have way more to work against. They think they're good. But if a liberal justice was like, oh my gosh, I've been sanctioning murder, and the Holy Spirit got a hold of them and they were convicted and they want to change, they might bring the consistency they had as an evil person to doing good. Yeah. But, conservatives are not consistent.
Yeah. So just to put all of that in front of even talking about all these three here, Elena Kagan didn't say very much. Yep. We know where she's going. It's not going to be a surprise to anyone which way she goes. Yep. She's very pro-abortion. But then Sonia Sotomayor, we already talked about her a little bit. She had a really dumb thing on Starry, Decisis, and how
that's great. It's going to live on in infamy. I love it.
Yeah, that was good. She had another good, very, very insightful to the insanity of the left point. She was arguing. It was kind of against the pain capability, which is not where the pro-lifers should be arguing from anyway. But in some of the amicus briefs that Mississippi filed in the case, they're arguing, well, children at 15 weeks can feel pain. And then Sotomayor comes back and she says, no, this isn't pain. There are people who have died who still flinch if you touch them. It's not because they feel pain. And so she's basically comparing children in the womb to people who are completely dead.
And flinching.
Right? That's the comparison that she's making. It's
and again, with no respect for the Supreme Court, you're a freaking idiot, lady. Like, that, you're crazy. Yeah. That is dumb. You are dumb. Yeah, how are you on the court?
She's like, they can't feel pain without their prefrontal cortex. But it's incredible that she can make arguments without her prefrontal cortex.
No, she has one, but like, she doesn't use it. It is nuts.
I don't know. The jury's out on whether she has one.
Well, the crazy thing is she'll say that.
There's no evidence for it.
I mean, she can walk and chew gum. But like, the crazy thing is not only she says that, but there are like all these like liberals on Twitter that are like, you're just like, you guys used to pretend like y'all were the intellectuals. Yeah. Like, this is really, really bad arguing. Yeah. Yep. But yeah, she was she gave us. She's my favorite from the whole thing, Yep. She's my favorite. She gave us some really good, memeable stuff.
And you know who else just gave us some good memeable stuff? You just made an all-time viral GIF for the ages there that we are definitely turning into a GIF.
I don't even know if I did.
Russell snapping in a Z. Yeah.
Is it a Z? I don't know.
I don't know what it is.
I just I bet you that was a very white arm flailing about.
Anyway, so Sonia Sotomayor is really stupid as a cap on Sonia Sotomayor there. She is really dumb. And she wears a black robe, so her opinion's supposed to be important.
And it is. And for all of you people who are actually not engaged in pushing back the culture of death, it is not sinful or wrong to say that a dumb person is dumb when they say dumb things. That was very dumb.
Yep.
Now, Stephen Breyer gave us a good quote here.
Yeah. So Stephen Breyer, kind of on the Starry Decisis topic, went kind of in an interesting direction and made a really just a really dishonest point. He says the country decided to resolve its differences by this court laying down a decision in Roe.
Small country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, small country. It's like, no, 9, ridiculously evil people in robes decided, or at least most of them ridiculously evil people in robes.
A majority of them.
Yeah. Yes, decided to
the
write
other
something.
two couldn't prevail upon them.
Decided to write something into the Constitution. No one said, hey, Supreme Court, please settle this question for all time. No, he's trying to give it more legitimacy than it actually has. It was a completely illegitimate decision, and everyone with a brain knows that. But he's trying to say, well, the whole country, made this decision. No, you guys did.
Yeah. And it makes it sound like this was like an elective process type thing, which is weird because the left was supposedly trying to avoid looking political. But he's making it political by this. It sounds like the country just took a big old vote. And they're like, hey, let's give it to the court.
Think about the ludicrous nature of this. Now, I don't think there were just like tons of abolitionists there. There were some abolitionists there. But here's a guy inside of a building saying, we've settled the differences here. And like outside, there's like pro-lifers and pro-choicers clashing with each other and competing for like email subscriptions. It's like, what's going on?
We gave them a compromise. It was abortion on demand without apology.
We've already decided this. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's a out of touch comment.
Nobody cares about this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've already done this thing. You know, it's just like, okay.
A goofball.
Yeah. So, but yeah, he didn't. The most aside from that, he didn't
goofball
really
in like
else.
an evil dictator sense. I'm not trying to like downplay any of that, but
yeah, he's an evil dictator goofball.
It's an important clarification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's get to okay. So these are what the arguments were, and these are the questions and responses. So everyone knows because I got a few Facebook questions about this, as though I can't. Like I'm like, I get questions like, oh I feel really good that you think I'm like following this and you know that I have the answers, but I had to Google it too. But people are messaging me like, when are they going to decide on this? Mm-hmm. It's like I'm like, when do they decide on this? James, when do they decide on this? They're not going to decide on this until probably the spring. It's going to take them some time to write their decision,
or probably the summer even.
Yeah. It could be any time between really January and early July, but it's probably going to be closer to July because they wait for the more controversial stuff, usually towards closer to the end. So.
Which to me, like at one, I'm kind of saying, I always think, why can't they just make a decision like by the next Monday? Mm-hmm. You know, you say, well, because they have to write these things, they have to, and they've got a lot of other cases and all this kind of stuff. I understand that, but there's also something that goes on over the next 9 months. They're going to be like weighing and considering the outcome of it, the political nature of it. There'll be lots of lobbying and lots of stuff, like as though it's just a bunch of justices sitting down, looking at a case and the Constitution only. Yeah. That's a freaking joke. Yeah. They're going to be, doing that for the next 9 months. So having that said, we don't expect there to be a ruling on this. Again, why we are going to be going and demanding legislatures to pass bills of total abolition that go into an immediate effect and protect babies immediately. That could be done at a state level before this even comes down.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk now about possible, like what are the I mean, you've got 4 here, and you had 4 in your article.
Yeah.
There's, there aren't many more than these 4.
Or I think any others probably fall into a category of one of
these 4.
Yeah.
And so the first one would be just like strike it down.
Yep.
Just
uphold Roe and Casey completely.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Does not look like that's going to be the thing. Like that doesn't look like, from the questions, from the stuff we've talked about, doesn't look like a likely outcome. Right. That wasn't the way they did Casey v. Planned Parenthood. They didn't just sort of like uphold entirely. They fiddled with some stuff.
Which is, okay, it's worth noting there that that's not even consistent with the idea of stare decisis. Like Planned Parenthood v. Casey wasn't. It was a change of the standard. The standard did change.
But the upholding of the central doctrine of Roe. Right to abortion.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of shifted the goalpost to a different place. Like you're now talking about viability, when before that wasn't really the precedent that was set. And so even these kinds of changes that they've already done with all the stare decisis arguments that they make, it really isn't stare decisis in a lot of ways. It's like they don't really care about that.
They're always modifying things.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying it is possible that, come July, they're like, Mississippi is unconstitutional because it conflicts with Roe v. Wade, Casey v. Planned Parenthood, and our other 39 rulings. Yeah. That is possible.
And what's interesting,
they could just do that,
is in the Casey decision, obviously you had an 8-1 Republican majority, and when the shift happened, that basically the majority found out that they were in the majority was in this time in between the oral arguments and the decisions. Because what happened is that Kennedy, Souter, and O'Connor kind of all recruited each other to a certain position in this time. They weren't together on this position before this time.
Yeah.
And so right now, what you've got kind of John Roberts probably either arguing to uphold Roe and Casey or arguing or lobbying the other Republican appointees to do the compromise route. And so right now, John Roberts is arguing for that, and you got Clarence Thomas is going to be trying to get the other Republican appointees to go with him.
And I think he probably doesn't argue as much as John Roberts. Okay, so so it's not going to be decided for a while, but when it's decided, there are there's not an infinite different ways that it can be decided. There's basically 4 general ways that this thing could go. The first thing that could happen, which doesn't look like it's being signaled, is just striking it down.
Yeah.
Just basically saying, sorry, Mississippi, it's unconstitutional. You can't do what you're doing. Just striking it down, like they've done with so many other pro-life things, pro-life laws.
That would be the Starry Decisis thing to do. That would be in line with what they've already decided, and they're not changing the standard.
Yeah, they could side with the arguments that were made and say, the bodily autonomy argument and the Starry Decisis argument. They could all just basically, the majority could say, no, we've already ruled on this. The country's already decided. Sorry, Mississippi.
Yeah.
Pro-lifers, once again, welcome to the 40th ruling against your strategy.
Yeah. And
but I don't think that's likely. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was gonna say people. It's kind of unlikely because of the way that they postured. All 6 of the Republican appointees postured themselves against the pro-life attorneys during oral arguments.
Yeah.
So there is that fact. But the interesting thing here is, in KCV Planned Parenthood, no one saw coming what happened in KCV Planned Parenthood.
That is true.
What happened was after oral arguments. At oral arguments, there was no indication that the 3 Reagan and Bush appointees were going to do what they did.
Yeah.
But what happened was after oral arguments, in kind of the months between, like this long period, there was recruiting going on. And David Souter, his aide, actually affected David Souter. An article came out about this recently.
Yep.
And then David Souter recruited Kennedy and O'Connor kind of to this cause that he eventually, the opinion that got written, and then Kennedy authored it.
Yeah.
But it was this time it was recruited, and it was David Souter who kind of led the charge on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
And it looks human, but there's powers and principalities here.
Right.
There's this time period where, we could say it's signaling out that they're going to do something here. And I would say that I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
That they're going to figure out, is there a way for us to let the pro-lifers win and keep abortion legal and just keep delaying abolition? That's what I'm saying is looking more likely. It's not looking like what I would like for them to do, because it has the same effect. Striking it down and it has the same effect of allowing it. Yeah. Because 15 weeks is enough time to murder all the children.
Well, it's interesting that we're at... Sorry, this is just kind of an aside, but it almost got me a little bit choked up thinking about it. But 40 failures, at the Supreme Court level, maybe, and the abolitionist movement is where we're at now.
Yeah, and what you mean by that is 39 abortion-related cases have come before since Roe v. Wade, and they've upheld Roe every time.
Yeah, if this one happens again, that will be the 40th, and maybe this will be the point where it's like, this was the 40 years in the wilderness, this is the 40 days for Christ, and we're just going to do it after this.
And it's possible that it wakes up tons of pro-life.
Yeah, the church is actually going to rise up and do this. That's our hope, seeing this kind of if it happens again, maybe this will be the last time.
That would be the grace of God.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds so to pro-lifers watching this that just don't understand this paradigm. Mm-hmm. They don't get that. So not likely that they just strike it down. Second possible option, would be that they uphold the 15-week ban by ruling that the Constitution is just neutral on this and give it back to the states.
So this, I wouldn't say is the most likely, but I think it's possible, given a few things. One, given how strong Clarence Thomas has been arguing for this for a long time. Two, and this is, I think, the real important one, the growth of the abolitionist movement, right? 39, I think we mentioned this already, 39 abortion-related cases have come before the Supreme Court, and Roe has not been overturned in any one of those 39 cases. The only reason I would say that there is a chance this might be different is because of the growth of the abolitionist movement. Because there are abolitionist bills all around the country saying, we're going to abolish it with or without you.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court might say, we better kick it back to the states
before we get exposed.
Before we just have states just defying us. Because they know that states will defy them on lesser things like medical marijuana or something like that. Yeah. But they have to think to themselves, if a state like Oklahoma criminalized abortion in defiance of us, we look illegitimate. Yeah. We can continue to look legitimate if we just kick it back as a states' rights issue. Again, that's not the most likely outcome here, because that's not John Roberts was not arguing, well, maybe we should just kick this back to the states. That did not come out of his mouth.
Right.
That didn't really come out of anyone's mouth, like explicitly, right? Like no one's like saying
only Clarence Thomas ever.
Like, yeah. And so Clarence Thomas saying the same thing. This it's not constitutional, so it was a bad thing. It should be up to the states. He's always said that. But the most likely, so that's a possibility, but not
the most likely.
The most likely.
Yeah.
It could still happen, and there could be things to talk about whether that's good or bad or what the world looks like following that. But the most likely thing that's going to happen, and the thing that I think is the most signaled, is upholding the 15-week specific thing, like allowing Mississippi to curtail abortion after 15 weeks, and thereby saying to all the states, we, the Supreme Court, your God, will allow states to criminalize abortion or ban abortion after 15 weeks. Changing the viability rule.
And this is, again, I think it's the most likely because I think that John Roberts is probably more influential on people like Kavanaugh and Gorsuch than Thomas is. So this is the most likely.
And they've done it before.
Yeah, and they've done it before. And it's also, as I think we've mentioned, it's the worst case scenario because it does nothing. The change from, as Roberts pointed out in his arguments, he said there's almost no difference between 20 weeks and 15 weeks. 15 weeks is plenty of time to make up your mind that I want to murder this child.
Yeah.
That's plenty of time. So there's no real difference, but can you imagine the celebration from many pro-lifers? We got it down to 15 weeks. And so that they'll channel that as, look, our strategy of appealing to the court for incrementalism is working.
Yeah, and
it'll keep the scales over people's eyes.
Yeah, and I don't know all the specifics of the Mississippi law right now off the top of my head, but a lot of the abortions that can happen like 20, 22, 24 weeks are because of like severe fetal abnormalities and stuff are detected at that later ultrasound, and then people, instead of like loving their children with disabilities, that kill them. That's not the most abortion. Most abortions happen just, I don't want to be pregnant, all these different reasons. But it really won't change anything probably. You can probably still have a 15-week abortion ban go into effect with the caveats and exceptions, except in the case of severe fetal abnormality, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's on the Mississippi one or not.
There's no fetal abnormality exception in the bill. But what still would be in effect, right, John Roberts, he's bringing everything from Casey into the new 15-week standard. And what you have in Casey is the woman's health, and in Roe and in Doe v. Bolton, right? The woman's health, which can mean pretty much anything. She can be under a lot of stress. So you can have an abortion at the moment of birth because of stress. Or just
all a woman ever has to do is say, I will kill myself if you don't let me kill my baby.
Right.
Which is mental health.
And all of that would transfer over unless they take it out. But if he just keeps Roe and Casey and brings it to 15 weeks, all of that would remain.
So nothing would really change. But the reason we say this is the most likely outcome, and also the worst outcome, is because it'll have the effect of lots of decent pro-life Christian people that we want joining us, calling for total abolition, will feel satisfied that they got something. And all the smash mouth incrementalists will say, we got something, we can go back to more. Maybe they'll write the opinion and they'll give a nod to Doug Wilson, be like,
we're coming back for more.
Right now we're going to allow you to do 15 weeks, but hey, you guys come back in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and give you more.
And there is some hope here that, because I've been taking lots of screenshots because people have been celebrating preemptively on this thing.
Good.
It's over, Roe's done, it's last legs type thing.
Yeah, I've been paying more attention to Lincoln Riley than this thing. So
yeah, so it's like, okay, well, we're gonna bring up those screenshots if this happens because it's not a victory. And you think, if you really think like this being rolled back to 15 weeks, you're talking about Roe being overturned, right? That's the victory that you're talking about. And if it isn't, we got to throw it in people's faces and be like, look, this was not what you said it was. Yeah. And you were making promises and you were saying, this is the thing you got to do. And it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So,
and it becomes a useful thing for us, to persuade people. But I remember like when Texas passed HB2, all these anti-abolitionists in Texas were like telling me to shut up and that I was crazy and that Texas had basically abolished abortion. And I'm like, whatever. And of course, some of those people became abolitionists, but most of them are now celebrating SB 8. It's sort of like it's in the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again. But that's why this is such a bad possible outcome.
Yeah.
Is it just reinforces the status quo.
Yeah, and one other point to wrap up this possible option here. That's why it's extremely important that people be sharing podcasts like this, the articles that we and other abolitionists are going to be putting out, because people need to know that 15-week compromise that is the most likely outcome. That is awful, and people need to know that that's awful instead of good. Yeah. And so be sharing this episode, be sharing future articles from Free the States and stuff from our friends at Abolish Abortion Texas and other places. Yeah. This is extremely important that people know the 15-week compromise that Roberts wants is a crushing defeat for the cause of justice.
More of the same.
Yep.
Just perpetuation of violence under the legal covering of bad justice decrees. So, and then
the last option that they could do is they could do equal protection and uphold the right to life for all people.
Yeah.
And
now, I know you argue this is like an option for them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, you do know who you're talking about. Like they could all sometime in the next year, half year.
Not going to happen for the simple reason that the vast majority of the pro-life movement hasn't asked them to do it.
Yeah.
Pro-aborts definitely don't want them to do it.
They go, no one came before us and said, you should establish equal protection and justice. Yeah. Not a single one of us have said that before.
Pretty much
all we're going to do it.
They've all pretty much universally made the argument, this is like, give it back to the states. Yep. They haven't said, let's get equal protection, let's get criminalization. They haven't asked for that at all. So
at least the attorneys in the case, there were a few amicus briefs that did make this argument, but none of those were used by the actual attorneys in the case. So it's extremely unlikely. And as we mentioned earlier, Justice Thomas, by far the most anti-abortion justice, even rejected this argument back in the Carhart case in 2000. So it's very, very unlikely.
It would have been freaking fantastic if Clarence Thomas said, well, as Bradley Pierce argued in the amicus brief from Abolish Abortion Foundation, this is an unjust criminal act and it's against the higher law of God. But that didn't happen. So the idea that they would somehow, against everything they've said and done and who they are as people, go this direction. But it is a possibility.
It's on the table. I actually, in my article, I gave it 0%, which is probably about right. I gave the 15-week compromise 60%, 20% overturn Roe completely, 20% double down on Roe completely, and 0% for abolish abortion.
I just think that whenever something has a 0% chance of happening, 80%, it's not 20%, actually...
20%?
No, it says 60, 20, 20.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, I'm not good at math either, but I think when something has a 0...
I'm not good at listening all the time.
When something has a 0% chance of happening, it doesn't have a chance of happening. So it's not actually one of the options. That's how I am. There are three possible options. There are four possible options. One of them has a 0%.
After that 0%, there's like a 0.0000000 or something like that. One.
Yeah. So you're saying there's a chance.
Jim Carrey meme here. Yeah. So we've said what is the most likely outcome, and in the event of that likely outcome, we have to do what we're already going to do, regardless of the outcome.
So there's all those percentages about what might happen, but there is a 100% chance that the right and just and biblical and constitutional thing to do right now is to go to your representatives and say, you must repent of allowing child sacrifice and abolish abortion, and bring people from your churches and your communities with you. Even let's say of all the outcomes, let's say you have different percentages, you think they might actually overrule Roe, or you actually think there's a good chance of them abolishing abortion. They don't, but let's just say you think that. Beat them to the punch.
Yeah, you think it's going to be sent back to the states? Well, then even the event that they're going to send it back to the states, in a year.
Yeah.
You should be passing legislation to criminalize abortion in your state right now. There's none of what we talked about suggest or encourage anyone to wait with any of these outcomes. And that's the thing that I fear most from these things that happen is that again, I've said it already, but we're going to ask people to abolish abortion, and they're going to tell us, I'm waiting on what this court said. We're going to go and we're going to ask people to criminalize abortion, and they're going to say, well, the Constitution is neutral on this. Different states can do different things. It doesn't make really sense for Oklahoma to criminalize abortion and California to keep it legal. It must not be murder. Lots of bad education comes from this circus. But our obligations don't change, and neither should yours. Regardless of what happens, you need to join the abolitionist movement, like James says. Spread this, because I know that a lot of the stuff we're saying just sounds crazy to people. Like, if you tune into a pro-life podcast, they are just hoping and praying that any of the options happen, except for the striking of it down. We have a different perspective here. Our perspective needs to grow in the culture.
Yep. Gospel Coalition out there saying we can be hopeful right now.
Oh, really? The Gospel Coalition says we can be hopeful?
Yeah, get your hope out of the Supreme Court. Just stop hoping in them. It really is stupid to do it. Put your hope in God and then do a bold thing and abolish abortion.
And guess what? The Supreme Court, reacting to culture, might very well follow your lead, and that's the best way to get them to do the right thing, is to yourself and your community and your county and your state to go do the right thing, and they will follow if enough people are doing the right thing. So go freaking do the right thing.
If we had state after state passing bills of abolition in the first 2 or 3 months of the sessions in this coming year, you can bet your bottom dollar that the Supreme Court would straight up be like, we're going to send it back to the states.
The odds would go up to about 99%. Say if 10 states passed abolition bills by March of next year, I would say there's a 95% chance that they overturn Roe completely. That's how drastic the percentage was changed.
Because it's not just
abolish abortion.
It's not just about the oral arguments that the pro-life attorneys made. It's about what happens in the culture. And if it turns out that the opposite is done and no states put forward bills of abolition, if this coming session 10 states pass 15-week bans following this, you know what the Supreme Court's going to do? This is the new line. So it's up to pro-lifers whether they're going to,
become abolitionists.
Or set the new line at 15 weeks.
So become abolitionists and let's kill the beast.
Let's slay the dragon.
We've had a lot to say on this one, and I think that I hope that this analysis has helped people think more clearly about this stuff. And I don't want to belabor the point too much on the outro here. I know we've gone really long for you guys, but So thanks for listening in. I hope that you guys got a lot out of this. And, and share it.
Like, share. Now we're going to do this real quick. So we have an upcoming Abolition Now conference, February 5th through the 8th in Oklahoma City.
Registration is online
Registration's online. Need you to sign up with the registration. There's T-shirts and material and so on and so forth. And this is just one of the little sketches that I did for part of the logo, part of the T-shirt, Thou Shalt Not Murder, with a little preborn image bearer. I don't usually sign my work, but I started signing my work just because I was getting in trouble for not doing it. But this is a original pin that camera's on.
Oh, that camera died. I gotcha.
Yeah, this is original pen and ink drawing that we are giving away to one of our regular monthly donors or big donors. And so if you want a chance at winning this piece of art or any other piece of art, sign up for us if you want.
So that drawing is on December 30th, the last episode of the month. So go to freethestates.org/donate to get your name in the bowl. So please go do that. Please be looking out for episode this Thursday. Assuming everything comes together in time, we're going to be interviewing the producers of the new documentary that's coming out on abolitionism. So you don't want to miss this Thursday. So make sure that you're subscribed, watching out for Thursday, and we will see you then.
We're committed to being as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. See you next week.
Tagline.